Hi there, it's Alexandra from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and I'm here with the early spring garden tour. We're in the kitchen, I'm afraid, because it is so blowy outside that every time I stand outside I don't think you'd even hear a word I say. And if we wait for the wind to die down, then it'll start raining. We've been away, but in the time we've been away, Britain has had two of its most severe storms in recent memory, which was called Storm Ciara and Storm Dennis. And it's been fine in the garden. We came back and we have actually, a couple of pieces of trellis have been blown down. And also where we had a Kiftskate rose, it was cut back. I talked about this in, I think, the October garden tour. We had a Kiftskate rose that had grown right over a pergola and over the wall and over the alleyway, and it had just gone for miles, and it was beautiful when it was in flower. But there was such a lot of it that I thought we really had to cut it back. And I have to say, I am so pleased we did, because if that volume of Kiftskate rose had got Storm Dennis under it, I think we would be looking at a tumble down wall now, as opposed to just a bit of barbed wire which has got pushed over by the wind and by the weight of the rose on the other side. So I think it really is worth, when you've got climbers, evergreen climbers or climbers that are really bulky, making sure at the beginning of winter that you do cut them back quite a bit, because they just turn into a sort of sail. This February, halfway through, we'd had 141% of the rain we normally get in the whole of February, and there's still heavy rain to come, and there's been awful flooding in other parts of Britain, but we have been relatively okay. But the temperatures have actually been quite mild, quite warm. And so, of course, all this rain and this warmth has meant that things are springing up, and it seems to be a really early spring. And I'm hearing this from friends on Twitter and things like that all over Britain. We're getting flowers and things up quite early, which is great, because if any of the pollinators come out early, there is something for them to look at. But it means that we got back to a garden looking a bit overgrown, out of control, and weeds already taking over. And that's the sort of thing that's quite daunting when you've got to unpack, get back to work, etc., etc. But one of the things that arrived while I was away was Laetitia Maklouf's new book, The 5-Minute Garden. Laetitia Maklouf is a gardening writer who finds herself overwhelmed by her own garden, because she has lots of small children, and she does what I completely recognise what she says in the book. She says, you know, I go outside, I spend hours in the garden, get it all straight, and then somehow a few weeks slip away and suddenly you discover you're right back to where you started. And so you're always looking out the window thinking, oh God, I've got to do this, and then the lists build up. So I went out into the garden. Her principle is that if you take 5 minutes every day to do just something, however small, then you won't ever get overwhelmed by your garden. And so when I went out with my cup of coffee and I looked round and I thought, oh gosh, those cherry tree branches, they're crossing over, I must add that to the to-do list. I then thought, no, I'm going to get out my secateurs and simply cut them off now. Put down my coffee cup, got up the loppers, dealt with the crossing branches, put the loppers away, picked up my coffee cup again, 5 minutes. Thank you, Laetitia. Really, really helpful book. And it looks very pretty, it's very well written, and I'll put some links in the description below to it, because there's lots of useful information. Like she does say, do 5 minutes weeding every single day, and you will never find the weeds get on top of you. Well, I am going to try and stick to that, but it is a bit difficult. Laetitia's not suggesting that you can do all your gardening in 5 minutes a day, and particularly not at the slightly larger end of middle-sized, people with 1/3 of an acre, 1/4 of an acre, 1/2 an acre. There are going to be times when you just get out there for about 2 or 3 hours. But what she is suggesting is tips and tricks to cut down the time you spend, for example, using evergreens in pots, which is something that I do here. And she's also saying that it simply stops you getting overwhelmed if you just put in 5 minutes a day and just do 1 or 2 tasks. Now, I've mentioned cyclamen before as being a lovely plant to have in a winter garden, because the leaves spread over the bare earth just when you need it. And the flowers are very sweet. You get flowers in autumn for some cyclamen, and for cyclamen coum, you get flowers in spring. And then in the summer, when lots is going on in the garden, they disappear underground. So pretty perfect. But has anyone else noticed that in this very, very wet weather, that the cyclamen leaves are growing huge? I am quite sure that my cyclamen leaves in the past have not been as big as my hand. And I just wondered if I was imagining this. But anyway, let me know in the comments below, because I'd be really interested to know if some people are noticing that this very, very wet weather we're having is actually making some plants bigger. So generally looking around the garden, there's quite a lot in flower. And I think possibly my favourites from this time of year are the cherry tree blossoms. The early cherry tree blossoms, and I think this is Prunus nigra, this is the black cherry, ornamental black cherry. And it comes out really early. I mean, one of them has been out already before we went away. So that's the end of January. So if you want a small tree in your garden, I think it's really worth looking at these ornamental black cherries. They have a lovely, also quite dark red foliage. So you've got a beautiful pale pink blossom very early in the year. So they have something to offer almost all the year round. And I have to say, I never, ever, ever do anything to them. So they do seem to survive on neglect, although I'm sure if you're a purist, you'll think, oh dear, she should have pruned that one a bit better. One of the huge joys of this time of year is the sunsets, and we've had a few amazing sunsets. And it's so wonderful to see the starlings. The starlings get together in groups, and I don't understand why they do it. Apparently this is called a murmuration of starlings. But they go into the sky and they fly around in the most amazing patterns, and it looks like water being poured out of a jug, or it looks like a ghost. And they'll spend about half an hour just flying around in ever-growing larger groups, and then 2 groups will split, and then 3 groups will come together, and then a single bird will flow in and a couple of birds will flow out. I don't know what they're doing, but they are a fabulous thing to watch at this time of year. One of the plants in the garden that does particularly well, and I don't know if it's a weed or not, is winter heliotrope. And in the winter it just goes everywhere, and it does have quite a pretty flower, and it is very invasive, and it does cover quite a lot of space. But I have tried to get it out of the garden. I have failed. And I'm just wondering what I could possibly plant that would out-compete it. And I've mentioned Wild About Weeds by Jack Wallington before, about how you can actually live with weeds. And since reading it, I have tried to live with winter heliotrope, but I really can't. I don't like it. And I think that's something one can feel, say, fair enough, okay, you don't like it. So looking at what does well in the winter, because it's in the winter it seems to spread so much, I spotted that the front garden, the bergenias, are just going so brilliantly. And I think that one of the patches that I've tried to clear of winter heliotrope, and where I've also tried to grow rhubarb, but it has struggled a bit, I wonder if I dig up some of these bergenias, which do need lifting and dividing because they spread a lot, and stick them in this patch, perhaps they will outcompete the winter heliotrope. So March would be a good time to lift and divide perennials, so I will wait a couple of weeks, partly because they're still in flower and they look so gorgeous here. But anyway, that's on the to-do list. I think it might take more than 5 minutes though. The other flowers I do really love at this time of year, of course, we're just beginning to get the early daffodils and narcissi. There's a beautiful little one called tete, which is always, it's an absolute butter yellow, and it's got little blown back petals, and it's just so sweet. It's absolutely miniature, and it pops up like a little kind of, almost like a sort of ring in a jewellery box. It's just a lovely plant. And of course, the other plant that I find fantastic is leucojum. Leucojum comes out quite early and it goes on for quite a long time, and it's like a giant snowdrop, and it's planted around all our silver birches, so you've got the white bark and the white flowers together, and actually that is something that I really do love. I've often said we carry on mowing our lawn throughout winter. It's a tip that was given to me by the professional landscaper and garden specialist Matt Jackson, and he said professional gardeners carry on mowing throughout the year. Obviously not if you're covered with snow. However, it has been so wet we haven't actually managed to go out to mow the lawn, so the lawn is looking really tufty, and we just need it to dry out. We just need one day without rain. I don't know if we're ever going to get it. If you'd like to see how the garden changes month by month, there's a garden tour playlist which I've got at the end of this video, and so you can actually look back and see what last February was like. because they are quite different sometimes, these Februaries, and that's part of the joy of doing a video every month. If there's anything you'd like me to cover in the gardening world, please do leave a message in the comments. I really appreciate all the messages you leave, and also it's just great to hear what you like and what you don't like and what you'd like to hear more of. And if you'd like more tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden, then please subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.